There's a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with how much sleep you got last night. It doesn't come from lifting heavy things or running long distances. It comes from a conversation. Maybe it was a perfectly normal one. Maybe it was even pleasant. But when it ended, when the other person walked away or the phone call disconnected, something inside you felt hollow. Like someone had quietly unplugged you from your own energy source without you noticing. If you've ever walked away from a social interaction feeling more tired than when it began, this is exactly what we're going to explore. And by the end, you'll understand something about yourself that most people never stop long enough to recognize. Some people carry this experience like an invisible weight. They show up to dinners, work meetings, phone calls, and casual catch-ups, and they perform beautifully. They laugh at the right moments. They ask the right questions. They nod, they listen, they contribute. But underneath all of it, there's a slow bleed happening, a quiet expenditure of something they can't name. And when it's over, they don't feel the warmth of connection. They feel the ache of depletion. These aren't antisocial people. They aren't cold or broken or unfriendly. In fact, many of them are the ones others describe as the best listeners, the most thoughtful friends, the ones who always seem to understand. And that's precisely the problem. Think about the last time you sat across from someone who was telling you about their day. Not just the facts of it, but the emotional texture, the frustration with a coworker, the anxiety about a decision they haven't made yet, the subtle disappointment they couldn't quite articulate. You weren't just hearing words. You were constructing their inner world inside your own mind. You were feeling what they felt, adjusting your facial expressions to match the gravity of their experience, choosing your responses carefully so they felt heard. Now multiply that by every conversation you had that day. Every interaction where you unconsciously tuned your emotional frequency to match someone else's. By evening, you weren't just tired. You were someone who had lived through 6 or 7 emotional lives that weren't yours. Psychology has a term for this, and it's more precise than most people realize. It's called empathic labor. It's different from empathy itself, which is simply the capacity to feel what another person feels. Empathic labor is the ongoing, sustained effort of managing that capacity in real time. It's the constant monitoring of another person's emotional state while simultaneously regulating your own. It's the cognitive load of translating someone's feelings into the right words, the right tone, the right silence. And here's what makes it so draining. It operates almost entirely below conscious awareness. You don't decide to do it. It just happens. Your nervous system picks up signals, your mirror neurons fire, your prefrontal cortex starts calculating the appropriate response, and all of this is happening while you're also trying to remember what you were going to say next. The brain treats social interaction the way an air traffic controller treats a busy runway. Every signal matters. Every miscalculation has consequences, and the longer the shift, the heavier the fatigue, but it goes deeper than neuroscience. There's a pattern that emerges in people who consistently feel drained by conversation, and it has less to do with how much energy they have and more to do with where that energy goes. Many of these individuals grew up in environments where they had to read the room early. Maybe a parent's mood was unpredictable, so they learned to scan for emotional weather before they even walked through the door. Maybe they were the peacemaker in their family, the one who smoothed over tension between siblings or absorbed a parent's stress so younger children didn't have to. They became fluent in the emotional languages of others long before they learned to speak their own, and that early fluency became a default setting. It followed them into friendships, romantic relationships, workplaces, and even casual encounters with strangers. They don't just participate in conversations, They perform an invisible form of emotional caretaking that no one asked for and no one sees. This is where modern life makes it worse. We live in an era of constant connectivity where the expectation of availability is baked into every relationship. Text messages arrive at all hours, carrying emotional weight. Social media feeds are saturated with other people's experiences, opinions, grief, joy, and outrage. Even a simple scroll through a comment section requires emotional processing. The introvert-extrovert spectrum, which people love to reference, doesn't fully capture what's happening here. This isn't about preferring solitude over socializing. It's about the cost of translation, the energy required to constantly convert the inner worlds of others into something you can hold, respond to, and carry. And in a culture that celebrates being available, being responsive, being emotionally generous at all times, the people who pay the highest price for connection are the ones least likely to complain about it. There's a hidden cost here that almost no one talks about. When you spend most of your relational energy attending to what other people feel, you slowly lose contact with what you feel. Your own emotional signal gets buried under the noise of everyone else's. You might finish a long conversation and realize you never once mentioned what was actually on your mind. You might spend an entire evening making sure everyone else at the table felt comfortable while ignoring the knot forming in your own chest. Over time, this creates a strange kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being surrounded by people who think they know you, when in reality, you've been giving them a carefully curated version of yourself designed to meet their needs. You become a mirror that everyone looks into, but no one thinks to turn around, and this is the part that deserves a pause. Because if you recognize yourself in any of this, what you're experiencing is not a flaw. It's not social anxiety dressed up as introspection. It's not weakness or incompatibility with the world. It's the natural consequence of having a nervous system that takes in more than average, processes it more deeply than average, and responds to it with more intentionality than average. Psychologist Elaine Aron's research on sensory processing sensitivity found that roughly 15 to 20% of the population has a nervous system that is, by design, more reactive to social and emotional stimuli. These individuals don't just hear a conversation. They absorb its subtleties, its tensions, its unspoken layers. And that depth of processing, while often a gift in terms of insight and connection, comes with a metabolic cost. The brain uses glucose, oxygen, and neurochemical resources at a higher rate during complex social processing. You're not imagining the tiredness. It's physiological. It's real. It's measurable. What this means on a broader level is that the way we think about social energy is fundamentally incomplete. We celebrate people who are always on, always available, always radiating warmth. We build cultures around extroverted ideals of connection and then quietly pathologize those who need to retreat after living up to them. But retreat isn't failure. Silence isn't disconnection. The need to be alone after deep conversation isn't a rejection of people. It's a form of self-preservation that allows certain individuals to continue showing up with the depth and presence that makes them irreplaceable in the first place. So, if you've ever canceled plans not because you didn't care, but because you had nothing left to give, if you've ever sat in your car after a social event and needed 10 minutes of silence before you could drive, if you've ever felt guilty for being exhausted by the very people you love most, this is your moment of clarity. You are not too sensitive. You're not bad at being human. You are someone whose capacity for connection runs so deep that it requires something most people never think to offer themselves: permission to rest without guilt, to close the door without explanation, to choose silence not as an absence of love, but as its quiet guardian. the world will keep asking you to give. People will keep leaning into your warmth because it is real and rare and they can feel it. But the most important thing you may ever learn is that you are allowed to protect what you carry. You are allowed to choose when and how much of yourself to offer. And the people who truly deserve your depth will be the ones who understand when you say, "Not tonight," and love you not despite your boundaries, but because of them. If this felt like something you needed to hear, sit with it for a moment. And if you want to keep exploring ideas like this, ideas that make the invisible parts of being human a little more visible, consider subscribing to Mind Reader 99. There's always more to understand, and you've already taken the first step by staying until the end.